It is the Pastor's Heart and Dominic Steele, and the sexed body does reveal and determine the gendered self. That is the thesis of Rob Smith's new book, The Body God Gives. The debates about gender are super important. As pastors, we want to express leadership in our churches on these issues. We want to help our people think biblically. And yet, with the culture moving so fast, it's an area that we feel ill-equipped. Well, enter Rob Smith, Theology and Ethics lecturer at Sydney Missionary and Bible College, and his new book, The Body God Gives, it's a distillation of his groundbreaking PhD thesis. It's just released, but already on its second print run. It's been described by my friend Sam Albury as remarkable and by far the best biblical treatment on this important topic. My prediction is that it will become a must-read reference book for us pastors as we come to teach not just on transgender issues, but on male and female in the beginning, on the making of a man and a woman, the meaning and mystery of marriage, sex and gender outside Eden, and sex and gender in the end. As I was reading it, I thought, I am so glad to have this book in my hand before starting work on the series in later in the year on Genesis, and I think it's going to be my constant companion in preparation for that series. Now today we start as Rob does in terms of understanding the scene and how we got there. But Rob, I'm going to ask you in a moment about the transgender tipping point, but just first, your pastor's heart on all of this. Because, you've written a book in a highly contested space and a battle for ideas, but at the heart of it, there are real people that you love with significant pain.
Yeah, look, my whole journey into this domain was fundamentally pastorally motivated and came out of pastoral questions and pastoral situations that I was aware of and that, some of them were very close to me. Mm-hmm. And so really from the get-go, I was not only trying to wrestle with the ideas and the scriptures, but also just with the pain of people and the confusion that really has taken hold at a much larger sort of level in our culture. So, for me, this has really been an exercise in pastoral theology from the get-go.
And really, it's been a decade of being a very big part of your life.
Yeah, it has. It all started back in 2014. Which happens to be what at least many pinpoint as the transgender tipping point.
But somebody you love came and talked to you about their gender incongruence.
Yeah, I've had quite a number of people over the years come to talk about these matters with me. Both people for whom these are live personal issues, as well as spouses, siblings, and lots of parents.
Yeah. Now, Transgender Tipping Point, 2013. What happened?
Well, look, it's always difficult to piece these things together, but.
And why do you call it a tipping point?
Well, that was the title of a Time magazine piece in 2014. But yes, it itself sort of pinpointed late 2013. As the moment where there was this kind of a cultural awakening to, the reality of people identifying as transgender in various ways. And that was, I think, precipitated by a number of things, but one was some prominent transgender actors appearing on various TV dramas.
And Bruce Jenner was right at the heart of it.
Bruce Jenner was, I can't remember exactly the date of Bruce Jenner's change to Caitlin, but that was maybe 2015, I can't remember. Mm-hmm. But a number of things happened around that time just to raise the visibility and prominence of these matters.
But although that, if you like, was the pop culture moment, if you look back, you can actually trace the origins of the transgender. I'm just quoting you. At one level, to the launch of Transvestia, the Journal of the American Society for Equality in Dress in 1952. Yep. But in another sense, you can trace it all the way back to Descartes.
And back to Eden, Genesis 3. So, this is the thing of, not only intellectual history, but any kind of social history. Where do you start? And Now, there are obviously watershed moments, and yes, philosophically, some major things happen there with Descartes that, never in his wildest dreams would he have thought they would kind of end up here. But yeah, there's a subjective turn there, as it's often called, that is.
Well, 90 seconds. I mean, you take 2.5 chapters to do it here, but 90 seconds. How do we get from Descartes to
Well, look. I do think that subjective turn is quite significant, and
you mean that I'm looking for truth from myself?
Yeah,
not I'm looking for truth from God.
Yeah. So it, in a sense, truth becomes something you determine. It's one of the mottos of the Enlightenment, of course, is that whole dare to know and the drive for autonomy. So it is wrapped up in bigger intellectual movements that go back into that time period. But it also intersects with all kinds of social movements and even changes coming out of the Industrial Revolution and changes in the family and society and the whole as Carl Truman has talked about, the whole invention of the individual and all that comes in those centuries. But really in earnest, the modern transgender movement, again, you can see roots of it in the 60s, in the sexual revolution, but it really comes to flower with the rise of queer theory and various social constructionist movements in the 1990s, late 1980s, early 1990s. That in one sense, that's a more obvious point at which to start telling the story. Now, I think in the book, I actually take it back to 1949 with Simone de Beauvoir and the second sex and the rise of second-wave feminism and certainly, I don't know there would have been a transgender movement apart from the feminist movement, or at least the second wave of the feminist movement. So I do think, and many have pointed this out, that there's a certain irony in the fact that many contemporary feminists, certainly those who are more second wave than, say, third or fourth wave, who stand quite opposed to the transgender movement and the invasion of women's spaces, as some have pointed out, even of their own number, they've only got themselves to blame. This reduction of sex down to it's as minimal as possible has kind of helped pave the way for this movement to really locate maleness and female maleness in something other than our biology.
Now, there's a chapter here that was super helpful in terms of giving me a sweep of the literature of queer theory. There'll be some people engaging with us today who don't even know what queer theory is. So what is that?
Where do you start?
Because you've read a lot now.
I have read a lot, but possibly too much. One of the mottos of queer theory is this idea of identity without an essence. And it really comes out of Nietzsche. Nietzsche's famous statement that there is no being behind the doing. It comes out of French existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre, and that whole idea that existence precedes essence. That there is no being behind the doing. That we make ourselves as we become ourselves. And so anyway, there's a lot philosophically going on there that feeds into queer theory. But that idea of identity without an essence, that everything is fluid, unstable, up for grabs, open to constant reinvention, ready to be not only questioned but queered and indeed reconstructed, deconstructed. All of that. That's queer theory is trying to challenge norms. It's trying to destabilize traditions. That's the game of queer theory. To accept nothing, challenge everything, and reinvent as much as possible.
You've talked about the tipping point in 2013, and when you first used that term, I kind of thought climbing to a summit, and it was climbing to a summit, and that was really hard, and then kind of effortlessly downhill afterwards. But actually, you then used the term tipping point to see the transgender tipping point as being more like the fulcrum and titter-totting back and forward, and now we've actually got a seriously contested issue.
Yes, that's right. There's always been, I suppose, resistance to the transgender idea as well as the transgender movement. So yes, the tipping point was more, I guess, a point of visibility and you might say broad social recognition and certainly politically and even legislatively acceptance of transgender identities and people's desire to change sex and register that on their birth certificates and all of those things. But yes, all along the way there's been resistance, and certainly we're very aware of that now, not only again from traditional feminists, but now from many countries and many medical bodies who are starting to say, hey, this is not the way to be responding to the phenomenon of gender confusion or gender dysphoria. So,
I mean, it right now it feels like really there's almost more voices saying, "Hang on," like when I say right now, I'm meaning kind of almost this month. Do you know?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it felt like every voice was saying, "Get out of the way." Do you know?
Yeah.
A year or two ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, there's been lots of ups and downs. I'm sure there's going to be more to come. So I don't think some people have said, is this matter now sort of beginning to resolve? I don't think we're there yet.
I mean,
that's for sure.
It's very interesting what President Trump has said, but that doesn't feel like that's the last word on the issue at all.
No, well, he'll provoke quite a
big backlash,
right?
Yeah.
So there will be a pushback. There already is, but I'm expecting a more concerted pushback, just partly out of kind of anti-Trumpism. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But certainly from my point of view, there are many encouraging signs in many countries, the UK and many European countries, Scandinavian countries, who are certainly in regard to child and adolescent gender transitions are saying, whoa, this is bad medicine. We should not be having these kinds of interventions on minors. Now, that in my mind, that's welcome, and I'm hoping Australia will kind of catch up quickly.
Now, as I read your book, there's really two halves. There's a historical philosophical survey, and then there's a treatment of the biblical material.
Yeah.
And the new ground that you've broken, for me, in the biblical material, is the way that you were interacting so clearly with the affirming biblical writers. Now, I thought we might get you back in a few weeks' time to talk about, if you like, part two, the biblical part,
Sure.
and just focus today on the philosophical areas. Okay. And we're going to put up on the screen a table from page 132, and it's dividing non-trans theory and then soft trans theory, hard trans theory, and queer theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you explain all of that to me?
I'll do my best. Let me look at it.
Over.
Look at it. But if you're looking at it on the screen, you'll see, I guess, the two questions I'm asking: how is sex determined, and how is gender determined?
Yeah.
Which, of course, presupposes, well, what is the difference between those two things?
Well, just for those, what is the difference between sex and gender?
Well,
I mean, that's the big issue of your book.
It is, but I guess you'll see in the different theories here. Different answers are given. Okay, so with what I've called non-trans theory, which again is embraced by many feminists, embraced by many Christians, embraced by many biologists, sex is determined by your biology, ultimately by your chromosomes and the kind of gametes that your body is designed to produce. That's what determines your sex, your biology. Now, what is gender? Well, gender is kind of the way you then express that sex in the world. Once upon a time, we used to talk about it, social sex, and the way that the kind of roles people occupy as men or women. We now also talk about psychological sex, which is another name for gender identity, and how people think about their sex and conceive of it. We also talk about gender expression or sex expression, the way people display in terms of dress and other ways we signal our sex, right? So again, there's always been a way of talking about what today gets wrapped up in gender, but I think for most people, sex is biology, and gender is the way you do sex in the world, the way you think about sex in yourself, the way you express it in dress and other ways. So for non-trans theory, that's pretty straightforward. Gender is something that builds off and extends out of sex. So okay, if you're male, your body's male, then your gender will be according to that and expressed in masculine ways that make sense to the world. Now, that's non-trans theory. Okay, so we'll park that one. But here we come to two versions of trans theory. In an earlier version of this, I just had one version, and I realised over time, actually, no, there's two different takes on trans theory. So the kind of more traditional soft version, as I've called it, would say your sex is determined by your biology. Yes, okay, we agree with that. But your gender is determined by something quite independent. It's your gender identity. Now, that's soft trans theory. Okay, so yes, my body's masculine, but I feel like a woman, and therefore I really am a woman because, my gender identity is that of woman. Now, that's the soft version. Now, the hard version would say not only is my gender determined by my gender identity, but that gender identity is so significant, it in fact is the truest thing about me. And so it actually determines my sex. So if I feel like a woman, then I'm actually a female. My gender identity tells me I'm a woman, so therefore, as many in the sort of hard version of trans theory would say, well, I'm a woman with a penis.
Right, okay,
Right? So in that sense, my gender identity has reclassified my body. That's the hard version. And so I don't have to do anything. I don't have to have hormones or surgeries. If my gender identity is woman, then I am a female. I don't need to do anything about myself. I can just be exactly as I am, but still claim to be a woman. So that's the hard version of trans theory. So it's important to recognise those two variants are out there. And so again, it's a bit the old saying that if you met one trans person, you've met one trans person, because the
variety is extraordinary.
Well, that's right. Even within these kind of two categories, there's a lot of different nuances. Now, the other thing in that diagram, or box or chart or whatever, if you're still looking at it, is queer theory, which, again, in my research, I realised, okay, it's kind of a different thing, because in queer theory, again, your gender is something that you perform, and your sex is determined by that performance. So again, this is this idea of no being behind the doing. I just happen to do gender in a certain way in the world, and it's that doing that determines my being, that gender determines my sex. So that's queer theory, which again is different from the other two. So sorry if that's long-winded, but there we go.
Super significant in queer theory was Judith Butler and her book Gender Trouble in 1990, which really was, she's really the mother of queer theory.
Yes, in many ways. There were some people pushing this path before her, but she certainly brought it again into the popular consciousness. And that book, certainly, which she said was just written for a few friends, it kind of went viral, as we say today.
And she's the one, in a sense, who has paved the way for the modern transgender movement.
Well, yeah, in some ways, although, again, she's pushing down the path of queer theory, and trans theory kind of riffs off that but goes somewhere a little different. Again, this is why, not everyone's happy with what she says about trans, particularly in Gender Trouble, and she herself admits she wasn't thinking very clearly about those matters when she wrote Gender Trouble. So it's quite complex. But, yes, in some ways she kind of, by questioning everything and deconstructing how we think about sex and gender, she certainly opened the door for, the kind of thought that has now led into these versions of trans theory that I've just outlined.
Then there's been significant pushback against her, and Kathleen Stock is one of the big ones.
Yeah.
British philosopher, feminist, gender critical thinker. Tell us about her take on that.
Yeah, well, Kathleen Stock is a very fine philosopher, and as you say, she's a gender critical feminist. She's also a lesbian, and that's significant because, for both gays and lesbians, it does require that sex is sex and sex is significant. For a woman to say I'm attracted to other women, means they're not going to be attracted to trans women. That is, males who are, well, either purporting to be women or trying to present themselves as women. So there's a whole pushback against the trans movement coming out of lesbian feminism as well as non-lesbian feminism as well. But Kathleen Stock's been a big voice in that and's paid a big price for it.
She lost her job at the university.
Well, yes, she resigned, but was kind of forced to resign by persecution and threats and issues of safety. So I actually wrote to her and got a short but grateful reply, which was lovely. But yeah, she's been very clear and very courageous and has written a marvellous book, I think, called Material Girls.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I interact with an article that she wrote a little before that called Can You Change Your Gender?
Yeah, so where are you saying Butler's wrong and where are you saying Stock's wrong?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think Stock is wrong in the sense I think actually I would agree with her understanding of sex and gender.
Mm-hmm.
That sex is biologically determined and that gender is what we, well, as it were, again, the way we express that, think about that. And so there's a sense in which gender is constructed by us because people do gender differently in different countries, different times, different cultures and so on. So I don't have a lot of disagreement with Kathleen Stock on those matters. But where we would both disagree with Judith Butler, and again, I should say, and the book will go through this, I mean, Butler's thought has evolved and she's even put a book out on gender recently, which again is different to her earlier books in significant ways. So it's hard just to say this is what she thinks. Well, it's more this is what she thought. This is what she thought at this point, this is what she thinks now. But fundamentally, again, Judith Butler is pushing down a queer path where, again, gender is something you do, and it's that doing is so significant that it determines who and what you are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she would say, I'm not denying that females and males are different, that bodies are different, but she would insist that the way we think about sex is determined by the way we think about gender, that we can't actually get back to understanding sexed bodies because our access is overlaid by our gender constructions, gender conceptions, gender performance, and so we can't actually get through that to think objectively, directly about sexed bodies. So again, that's germane to her way of trying to make sense of these things, but I think it's profoundly mistaken and profoundly unhelpful.
What do they make of you?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've certainly had plenty of criticism, and I'm expecting this book is going to, attracted so far lots of commendation, but I'm expecting...
As it trickles into the circles of...
Yeah.
I mean, at the moment, people who have... I mean, it's only coming out right now, but
yes.
And kind of been released at theological things and stuff like that. But
yes.
As it trickles into the wider community, and because it's written at such such a significant academic level, it will be interacted with by your opponents.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I expect it to, and I want to listen carefully to critiques of anything and everything, and I certainly can't claim perfection, or and if I've misread somebody here, then that's good to have that pointed out, or if there's something I've missed in a Bible passage that somebody put out, all that's good to hear. But again, as you said, I've been working on these things for over a decade, and I've deliberately in this book, and again we'll talk about this anon, engaged with, again, so-called Christian voices who are arguing a very different case, and try to, read them empathetically and engage with them, carefully and courteously. But I've found myself profoundly unpersuaded by what you might call the affirming case, or the Christian affirming case. And in the section we're talking about today of the book, that the kind of philosophical history, I think, with the help of all the people I've engaged and interacted with, it really does show the incoherence of trans theory and queer theory, and just the fact that the non-trans understanding held by a wide range of people certainly makes most sense of the evidence that we have. And the only way you can get these other theories is by, in a sense, just pulling an idea out of the air and claiming against the evidence that it happens to be true, that I have a gendered soul or a gendered self that somehow has no connection to my physicality, to the sex of my body. Who says? That is the big question. Yeah, who says? That's fine to say that's an idea, but what evidence is there that it's true?
We're going to get you back, and we're going to go through the biblical material in more detail. But just for the person who's just tuned in for this conversation, why do you think it's the case that it is sex that determines our gender from the Scriptures?
From the Scriptures, sure. Well, we will go through that in detail, no doubt.
Next conversation.
And we have talked about these things before.
We've had you on before.
But I have spent a lot of time in the book in Genesis 1 and 2.
And you said there's even more in Genesis 1 and 2 than you realised.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote, I don't know, what was it, about 45,000 words on Genesis 1 and 2, and realised I could have written twice that amount easily. There's so much there. But interestingly, the first thing we're told about humanity in Genesis 1, Adam, as the word is used there, is that God has made us in two sexed forms, right? Male and female, zakar and nekavah. So that's right up front in Scripture, the reality of the sex binary. And then as you move into Genesis 2, the language shifts from simply sex terms to, once upon a time I said it's shifted from sex terms to gender terms. I don't think they're actually gender terms, they're just human-specific sex terms, which is man and woman. Ish and Isha, the Hebrew words. But it's very clear that Ish and Isha map on to Zakar and Nekavah, the male and female. The man is the male, the woman is the female. There's no confusion about that in the text. And Jesus, of course, as I know you've pointed out,
Matthew 19.
Matthew 19 shows that alignment there. So there is in the Scriptures this nowhere where a male can be a woman or a female can be a man. That's just a kind of an incoherent leap. And then, of course, it explains why Scriptures, therefore, the Scriptures at various points, prohibit men dressing like women or behaving like women and vice versa. And so there is, again, not only what I've called in the book the sex and gender binary, but also the sex and gender connection, that Scripture is at every point either declaring or presupposing or prohibiting the disruption of. Does that make sense? Those two things, a sex and gender connection, sex and gender binary, that there are only two sexes, and those, therefore, that means there are only two genders corresponding to those two sexes. And the sex and gender connection, that gender is the outgrowth of sex. It's, again, the expression of the thought about that. As a male, I can't be a woman, and if I do, I'm doing something against my nature and something Scripture urges me not to do.
The thing I appreciated as I read through, I felt my confidence increasing in the scriptural position as I saw you in a nuanced and careful way interact with all these different scholars of history who had attempted in one way or another to undermine the biblical position. And I could see, I'm going to feel more confident next time I get in the pulpit on this issue. And I think friends everywhere, ministry peers everywhere are going to feel more confident as they get in the pulpit. And I actually think sermon series, I said this to somebody at lunch today, I think sermon series on early Genesis are going to be measured by before or after people had read Rob's book, because it's going to be so helpful for us in tackling this early Genesis material. So I think we're profoundly grateful for this decade of this labour. of yours.
Thank you for that, and I'm glad if that proves to be the case. The one thing I do want to say is, as I say at the very beginning of the book, that this is a book that is engaging with an idea. It's not engaging with the experience of gender dysphoria. It's not a pastoral manual.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to write that book, and
that is interesting to say that quite a few of the books that I'd read before on transgender have kind of been halfway houses between pastoral manuals and whereas this is really right up the Bible end.
Yeah. It was originally a PhD thesis, and still reads a bit like that at points, but I have tried to make it a little more accessible. But what I've tried to do here is to address, again, the theory that purports to explain the experience of gender dysphoria, but I don't think actually does. And in fact, I would argue that it actually helps create the experience. The theory actually...
So in the meantime, there are other pastoral... I mean, you're going to write your one in probably 6-12 months. Who knows when we'll see it. But in the meantime, you want to kind of read this book as the Bible book and a pastoral book. I don't know whether it's Preston Sprinkles one or one of the others, kind of in the other hand to be...
most definitely. There's some very good books that have gone into this space. I do think there's not enough, and that they've not gone far enough. But yes, Preston tries to go there in his book. Andrew Bunt has written a beautiful little booklet. It's only like 30 pages, but it's gold, called People Not Pronouns. Magnificent. That's worth getting. Sam Ferguson's written a little booklet, Crossway put out. I think Does God Care About Your Gender or something like that. That's very helpful. Mark Yarhouse has written a number of things. Again, I find Mark Yarhouse a little bit, not always as helpful as he might be, but certainly is very psychologically aware and pastorally concerned. And so there's a lot of good stuff in Yarhouse's material. But there needs to be more, much more. And I'm going to, I suppose, do my best to try and contribute to that. But I'm hoping others will too.
I just remember it was Yarhouse who taught me the line of, I'm sitting down with a transgender person and I say, I kind of feel like we're meeting to talk about chapter 7 of your life, but I don't know chapters 1 to 6. And just tell me, take me right back. I want to hear chapters 1 to 6. And I mean, just that little opening line of framing the pastoral conversation and seeing that you're bigger than this issue, was such a helpful line from Mark Yarhouse.
Very helpful line. And that certainly pastorally is the way we need to come to people. But I guess what the conviction behind this book is that underneath pastoral practice
stands theology.
Is biblical and theological understanding, and to some degree philosophical reflection as well. And we need to get that clear, and in order for our pastoral practice to be faithful and as helpful as it might be. So that's what this book is trying to sort out.
Thanks for coming in. Rob Smith has been my guest. We'll get him back in a couple of weeks to talk about the theology part of his PhD thesis that's just been published. The book is The Body God Gives. It's by Rob Smith. He's a lecturer in doctrine and ethics at Sydney Missionary and Bible College, and Rob has done us a great service with this book. My name is Dominic Steele. You're listening to The Pastor's Heart. We'll look forward to your company next Tuesday afternoon.